Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Dimitrios, CEO and co-founder of Intelligencia AI, an AI drug development platform that's raised $15.5 million in funding. Dimitrios, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Brett.
No problem. We were just joking there in the pre-interview. Your last name is a bit hard to say, and I didn't want to insult you to kick things off with our conversation. So could you go ahead and just say your first name and last name just so we know how it's properly said?
Absolutely. It's Dimitrios Skaltsas. I've been living in the States the last 10, 12 years, but I grew up in Greece, and that comes sometimes with hard names. I co-founder and CEO to Intelligencia AI. We're a pharma tech company, pharma being pharmaceuticals, not agriculture. Living in New York, spending a lot of time in Greece, where we have our major R&D hub, also around Europe with new customers. Have lived actually in 4 continents, in the US, Europe, where I grew up. I've lived in Africa, working in the social sector, and I've lived also in Singapore and the Middle East.
And did you start your career as a lawyer? I think I saw that on LinkedIn.
I did, yeah. I started as a lawyer, so I have a non-linear career path, and often I joke that I'm the least scientific person on our team. So I studied law. I started my career as a lawyer. I've done a bit of engineering, so I dropped out from the engineering school. Then I joined the consulting world with McKinsey. I did my MBA at INSEAD, and that's the year in Singapore. And I went back. Actually, I went to Africa to do some social sector work. Then I went back to consulting. I worked for a couple of years around Europe, the UK, Switzerland, Germany, the Middle East. And then I moved to the US. And it's an interesting story, actually, how I moved to the US, because at the time I had co-founded another company that was exporting spinach pies and cheese pies to New York delis, Greek traditional pies. And I had a co-founder who was fully based in New York, another one who was based in Europe, and I was a part-time. And I got myself a project with McKinsey somewhere in Pennsylvania, and I would spend my weekdays outside Philly, in King of Prussia, and then my weekends in New York, knocking on the doors of delis and trying to convince people to give it a try with our Greek traditional pies.
Talk to me about the early days of the company. Understand it was founded in 2017. Take us back to 2017.
2017, there's a bit of what people say, it's all about timing. So I was with McKinsey. McKinsey was experimenting with big data and AI, and they had built what they call new ventures. And at some point, I did not want to do consulting anymore. And I was offered the opportunity to move into new ventures and actually build the vertical for pharmaceutical R&D, both drug discovery and drug development. And that was kind of a wow moment. It was early days AI. That was 2015, 16. And I was building a team of data scientists and software engineers, and we're out there discussing with the industry and collecting ideas on what could be done better with AI. And one of those ideas actually came the core of what we do at Intelligencia AI. At McKinsey, we didn't have institutional patience or risk appetite work on this. And that was a bridge to the company. So summer to fall 2017, I left McKinsey, and with my co-founder, we started Intelligencia AI. And happy to share more of the early days stories.
Yeah, what were those early days like for you? Or maybe let's narrow it down to, the first 6 months. What were the first 6 months like?
Sometimes I make the metaphor of it's like being in love, like falling in love, where everything is rosy and you're very optimistic, and somehow you have a big disregard for risk, which helps a lot. Very creative days, and also challenging days, or very scrappy days, I would say. Our head of data science, who was the first person to join the company beyond me and my co-founder, he literally used to sleep on my sofa in a shoebox apartment in New York. So, in SF, where you are, people talk about working out the garage and That's how they started the company. In New York, it's working out of your sofa bed. So it was very scrappy. It was very kind of butterflies in the stomach type of feeling, like everything is possible. And, let's create something, let's upend the world. It was also tight. We didn't have any source of income as a company. We were literally bootstrapping the whole thing. And I was dipping into my savings. I never looked back. So I think we did the right thing. I would love to relive those days. And sometimes I hear from other founders that they relish those early days of falling in love. Yeah. What I often do is I try to relive it by maintaining some of the elements, some of these early day elements and culture in the company.
I think there's something so magical about the early days of a venture, like that sense of urgency and the fun. Everything's fun in those early days as you're first building something and you're so excited and things just move so fast. I feel like going from 0 to 1 really is the most enjoyable part of the journey for many founders.
It was. It was in many ways. Still, what I've come to appreciate is the evolution. You have to reinvent yourself, which means it never gets boring. The shift is that, again, back to the metaphor of falling in love. At some point, it feels like, okay, now you delivered the baby, and suddenly you have responsibilities. And, the baby stays up at night and poops and it gets sick, and you have to take care of it. So, what changed over time for me is the sense of responsibility. And that's limiting in many ways, but it helps people mature. And that's a good thing.
The baby analogy is very personal. I just had our first baby, or my wife had our first
Oh,
baby
wow.
last week. So
Congrats.
that hits home.
Congrats and the best of luck. That's
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you. How did you land your first paying customer? That's something else that every founder struggles with. You have an idea, it's innovative, it's exciting, it's cool, but getting someone to actually give you money for it is not easy to do when you're a startup. So, how did you pull that off? And what stage in the journey was it? Was that 6 months after launching? Was it 12 months? Was it 24 months? When did you start landing that paying customers?
Yeah, so we started fall 2017 and we built an MVP, right? I mean, many people come up with an idea and they start sharing it with the world and trying to secure a contract. And it works quite often. Then they build. We started product first, and for many years, actually, we have retained that MVP. But we built something, we had the first results in sometime late spring 2018. And I was like, wow, we solved the problem, right? We keep pushing the boundaries every day since then. But that was a moment where we started really reaching out to people in our network in life sciences. And it took us actually a few months. We raised money back then, and then it took us a few months, and we really signed the first customer early 2018. And it was kind of a bit of a Moneyball moment. I don't know if you've watched the movie.
Classic
Yeah,
move.
exactly. So I was often watching it in the early days, like literally with my co-founder and a data scientist, like sitting and watching the movie, and then going to the customers was reliving because you're this, in many ways, you're this choppy young guy who, speaks a different language. And people are not sure they get it, right? I mean, early days of AI and the pharma is not as risk prone as other industries or the innovation propensity, it's very specific to creating drugs. But when it comes to technology, it's unfortunately a bit backwards. You would go and knock on people's doors and say, this data driven decision making has been taking place in other industries for years now. And, sports and finance and so on and so forth. It was not the case in pharma. So we had to knock on a lot of doors, and ultimately a major pharmaceutical company trusted us because they had a need. They were building this external innovation function where it's a function where they look for new drugs from smaller companies, from biotech. And by default, they were building something that was forward looking and they wanted to embed innovative elements were the perfect match for them. And they took core technology and they help us actually expand on it. And that's the story of Intelligencia AI in the early days, not just the first customer, but the first several customers. We learned a lot. We listened, we embedded feedback into our product, and that's how created what I think is an industry-leading solution now. But synthesize it, it took some time and took a lot of faith on our end and ultimately also on our customers. That's a conservative industry for all good reasons.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. Yeah, it's one of those industries where I hope it's conservative. I think there's some industries where you think it's conservative and slow, but I think in this industry, you want it to be conservative.
Exactly. It's highly regulated for all the right reasons. And yeah, people are highly sophisticated and very careful on how they do things for all the good reasons.
How did the conversation around AI change for you post ChatGPT? So ChatGPT really came out into the world in November 2022? What were conversations like before that? And then what were conversations like after? And the reason that I ask is a lot of AI founders that I've had on or AI builders that I've had on, they say that was the critical moment that really did change things. Was that something similar for you?
No, Brett, the watershed moment in our space in pharma was COVID. When it comes to upending the paradigm of how people do drug development and drug discovery. It's a space where, on average, it takes about 10 years for a drug that is in clinical trials eventually to make it to the patients, to make it to market. And during COVID, it was shown that, it can be done much faster. You can accelerate many parts of the process. So that's where the whole industry moved actually its attention to AI and digital and start investing in the space. That's also where funds, investors, starting spending money on the space. Now, with ChatGPT, what happened is that it turbocharged all this. It kind of accelerated something that already started being in motion during COVID. And ChatGPT is not necessarily always a positive impact, right? In the sense that there's a lot of promise, there's a lot also of noise. So there are pharmaceutical companies actually are kind of shutting down or shutting out ChatGPT from their organizations because they're like, okay, we cannot trust it yet, so don't use it. Literally, they have guidelines for people not to use ChatGPT, and sometimes this flows also into the perception of other AI solutions. So always you get the question, okay, why should we trust you? Yes, AI is promise. Yes, we see the potential, but is it mature? And maybe that's for another question later on, but that's, I think, how we stand out also in the space.
And from your perspective, how would you summarize kind of the sentiment around AI right now? Is everyone convinced that it's going to be big in the future? It's just not ready yet. What's the general perception that they do have in the market?
I was talking with someone these days and they said, oh, that'll be another .com. Maybe it's very exaggerated, right? My sentiment is the world is changing. There will be more and more AI embedded in the workflows of pharmaceutical companies in our industry and more broadly across industries. As with any relatively new technology, it will go through its waves and has been going through its waves for the last, I guess, 25, 30 years. AI is not a new thing. It has experienced its waves. I think, it will, at some point, will mature. The challenge is to get the right use cases and convince people for each one of those use cases that the technology is mature enough. Don't see it as a magic wand. And definitely there are use cases with some maturity and there are many others with much less maturity.
Another thing that AI founders have told me is that now in the last year or so, last 2 years, there's just a lot more competition. There's a lot more people who are trying to bring AI solutions to market. What are you doing to rise above all of that noise that's out there and really capture the attention of the market?
When we started, we were the first AI company in our space, and then we've seen more showing up. And usually there were larger organizations who overlaid an AI or, in some case, advanced analytics layer into their offerings. Over time, what I have observed is that again and again, people who use both or multiple solutions, they turn and tell us, okay, you're not really competitors because you do actual AI, you go deep where some of the cases it's a touch of AI. So I think there's a lot of branding and marketing about AI, and people start getting more and more savvy on, what is actual AI that goes deep and what is not, and what is high quality AI and what is not. In our case, and I guess most industries, high quality AI is the one that relies on high quality data, which is not a given. That's usually the toughest challenge to do some decent AI. And in our case, again, in our industry, explainability goes a long way. People appreciate it. They dislike black boxes. These are highly sophisticated users who want to understand and actually embed AI into their own pattern recognition, into their own decision making. So yes, there is some overabundance of AI, and people have to cut through the noise, and that applies to customers. That applies to investors as well. Ultimately, it increases the burden of proving that you are the better solution, but that makes you stronger and has made us, for instance, stronger. We have definitely a more nuanced and more mature messaging now in the market. Another implication of what you're saying is that a lot of money flew into the space. And at some point, likely there will be some consolidation. So there are companies out there who cannot necessarily continue as standalone companies because they haven't necessarily found the appropriate go-to-market motion and they don't generate enough revenue. I think that'll be another byproduct of all this AI momentum.
What about the market category that you're in? Is it a drug development platform, a clinical development platform? How do you think about your market category?
Yeah, let me discuss a bit what we do and why. So we're in drug development, and drug development on average takes about 10 years for any new therapy to be brought to patients. So go through all the clinical trials that are required, and it costs a lot of money, in the hundreds of millions, if not billions. And what people quite often don't realize is that most therapies don't make it to the market. The clinical trials fail. Like 85, 90% of the drugs, of the programs fail. Now, there is a lot of risk in the space. That's the elephant in the room. And the way the industry has been historically, traditionally approaching that risk is quite suboptimal, which is shocking because it's an industry where science is very, very sophisticated and people are very, very sophisticated. So you have this paradox where science is great, decision making science is suboptimal, is not evolved enough. So, how people approach risk? Traditionally, they look at benchmarks. Breast cancer, phase 2, clinical development, 15%. That's our baseline. They have calls with experts, in the process called expert elicitation, and they collate the opinions. And if you're a large pharma, you have fantastic internal data. You have great data science teams these days. It's a limited view. It's a tunnel vision. Intelligencia was the first company actually to apply AI, machine learning, into better assessing the probability of success for new therapy. And again, the idea here is, there's this elephant in the room and someone has to go after that. The risk is at the core of drug development. If you can understand it better, then you can actually mitigate it better. And that means you can bring therapies faster to market. You can make better decisions on accelerating as well as potentially decelerating opportunities and spending your funds more mindfully. And there are cases like there are fantastic life-saving therapies in the market. At some point, we're safe, and people often don't realize this. But some of the major blockbuster drugs, at some point, someone had deprioritized them. We help people make better decisions, how to qualify a drug, how to understand the risk associated with its drug development, and ultimately make better decisions. And we're the first company who actually took a bet. AI, a data-driven approach, could work in the space.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
From a go to market perspective, what's the most important lesson that you've learned?
Listen to your customer again and again. When we start, we understood the need and we hope that AI could apply. And that's a bit of art. Like you embed a lot of information and then you create something. And these were the very creative days. And we came up with an approach that is not necessarily the one that, was used in the space. Actually was very different and much more effective. But a great solution is not enough. Ultimately, any company wants to have impact, right? You want to have customers, you want to have users, you want to move the needle in your space. And obviously, that's only possible if people use you. Yeah, one of the key learnings has been again and again, you build something great, that's the core. Then you need to find how to embed it in the workflow of users, how to build the right functionalities around this, how to, move yourself a bit from being a purist, if you will, to what the users exactly need, how they work nowadays. And that's how you ensure a higher adoption. And that's what we have done on Intelligencia AI. So listening to our partners, our users, to our customers, learning from them, and evolving our technology accordingly.
What about fundraising? As I mentioned in the intro, 15.5 million to date. What's that journey been like for you? And most importantly, what have you learned?
A lot of learnings. Sometimes I joke, funds is our drug in a good way. It's something you need to survive, especially in the early days, especially if you build technology as we did. We have a patent on our technology that's pretty unique for an AI company in our space. It's a patent methodology. For that, you need investment. To build the right data, you need investment. So I'm very grateful we had the opportunity to raise money. At the same time, I call it a drug because you can also become dependent on this. You can get into a cycle where you always need more money, not only to grow and build more fantastic functionalities and add more BD people to your team so that you take your product to more customers, but sometimes also to stay afloat, right? And let's face it, most of the companies that go into this VC funding cycle, eventually, to some extent, they become dependent. You learn to operate in an environment where there always tends to be more money than you need. And then, when you start getting pressed, then you go raise more money. I think that I love about Intelligentsia these days is that getting to a cash flow positive state while we retain high growth. And yeah, from my point of view, that's a very nice and maybe more healthy environment to operate. Most likely we'll raise money again in the future when we need the money. Right now, to some extent, R&D is funded by our customers. The commercial go-to-market, you know, motion and all of this is still maturing. We keep fine-tuning things and learning. I don't feel like if we had a lot more money to throw into the commercial engine, we would necessarily get better results. Sometimes it's the opposite. Like if you haven't fully cracked out some things, then start spending money to, the wrong process, the wrong direction. Yeah, I guess if I synthesize this, money, VC or external money is required for most companies that want to build a new technology. It's fantastic that this money is available. You have to be very careful with your partners in the sense that it's not just funds those people bring in. Actually, it's a marriage. Our investors are on our board. And it's great that we have those people on our board and we're aligned on incentives and direction. But again, that's not a given. Or you bring a business partner into the company or fundraising. Also, as with any partnership in life, be it personal or professional, you have to knock on a lot of doors. You have to look at many potential candidates and understand their goals, understand their values, and make sure there's some alignment. Because again, it's not just raising money. The successful relationships are based on common value system and on some common direction. That's important. What else? It's hard, takes time. Ideally, you have people in the company who can support you, at least with some of those aspects. Takes preparation. Similarly, as you go sell the product, the platform to customers, you sell the company to some investors. Yeah, that's my main learnings. Like, don't be overly dependent. prepared to spend a lot of time and energy on this, and be selective on the partners that you want in the company, on the board.
Super useful and super actionable advice there. And a lot of founders are fundraising now and finding it to be very challenging. So that's definitely helpful insights. Now, final question, since we're over on time, and I know it's late there in Greece, so I don't want to keep you too late on a Friday. Let's end with a question here on the vision. Can you paint a picture for us of the high level vision for the next 3 to 5 years? What is the company going to look like? And what's your impact going to be?
That's a great question. I'll start with the impact on the space rather than the company. Because a major reason why we start the company is to ultimately, have some impact and help drive better outcomes for patients worldwide. So my vision is drug development landscape gets more effective, more productive. It has been on a historical low when it comes to IRR on R&D. It's historical low. It's not sustainable. So I do hope that with our technology, we can help bring better therapies to patients faster, help increase the productivity in the space. As discussed earlier, help prioritize some of the great drugs that are being shelved right now and they come back. So to get there, the company, the way I see it, benefit a lot by being recognized as the gold standard in our space. Again, we have been pioneering a space. We having the first mover is not easy in many ways. It comes with its own challenges. But I think increasingly we get recognized as, the compass out there. When people think risk, they start thinking more and more of intelligentsia. We see increasing our user actually footprint from large pharmaceuticals, mid-cap and smaller pharma, as well as the financial markets. So people on the sell side and the buy side, people who write reports, like do the research, as well as people who allocate bets in the space. In 3 to 5 years, I would love to be broadly recognized as game changer, as this reference point, the gold standard in the space. I would love to have full therapeutic area coverage in what we do. We started with oncology, cancer therapies, and we have been expanding into immunology, inflammation, neurology, and so on and so forth. In the time horizon you offered, I would love to have full coverage. I would love to expand also in Asia, where increasingly there's very interesting activity, especially in China, but also Japan and South Korea traditionally. Keep learning from our customers, keep building adjacent functionalities, and ultimately have an impact in our space. Now about 100 people, strong company, interdisciplinary, probably will keep growing, and probably that means good returns also for our shareholders, investors, management team. But ultimately, you don't sweat over building a company primarily for this. I know it's often a commonplace saying, it's a vision-driven company, an impact-driven company. There's a lot of truth behind that. Building a company is a soul-wrenching experience in many ways. And you have to dedicate a lot. You have to sacrifice a lot. There are easier ways to make a living. What I see in our company is, most of us have gone through either directly or indirectly some healthcare-related event in our lives. I have, and many people in the team have. But we are fighting, if you will, for better outcomes for patients out there. And that would be my vision 3 to 5 years from now.
Amazing. I love the vision and I've really loved this conversation. I've definitely learned a lot. I know the audience is going to learn a lot from you as well. Before we wrap up here, if there's any founders that are listening in that want to follow along with your journey, where should they go?
Connect on LinkedIn. Visit our website, intelligencia.ai. Yeah, shoot me a note. I always love connecting with like-minded people, sharing experiences, learning from others.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for taking the time.
Great. Thank you for hosting me. Loved our discussion. And congrats on the baby.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.